Before we get into this video, I need you guys to please click that like and click that subscribe button. Please, it helps me out. We're trying to get there. I really appreciate y'all. Everybody who's waited for this video and who's subscribing and getting this notification. All you guys that are waiting until Friday, which is today. I hope you guys enjoy it. If you guys have or are already subscribed to the Patreon, you get early access. You got access to this actually on Thursday. So you got it about a day before. So congratulations to y'all that support me. If you guys want to click on the Patreon, check the link below. Other than that, Yu-Gi-Oh players, it's time. Here is your translated version of Andres's in-depth deck profile for all y'all that needed help with it. But without further ado, this took forever. I want to give thank you guys for your patience. I really appreciate it. I've been really busy with work. Cinco de Mayo had just happened. Plus it was Mother's Day, and then we had Mexican Mother's Day. So I've been slammed with work, and I'm actually doing this it is now midnight. So well, it's about to be midnight. I'm going to get this video on. But thank you guys so much. Hope you guys enjoy this. Make sure you guys comment. And let's go ahead and get into this. So here it is. All right. So you see the list is a little bit organized differently, and that is because he went in order from the top left all the way to the bottom. So we're going to go in order of everything that he went in depth on. And he had a lot of detail, and there's a lot here. Also, for those of y'all that don't know how to pronounce it, it's Mercohir is how you pronounce it. And it's actually, I believe, a Portuguese word. At least that's what happened when I typed in Google Translate. So when I say the Tri-Brigade Mercohir, that's what I'm going to be pronouncing it as. But anyways, let's go ahead and start off. So I have my notes here. Let's put this. All right, here we go. So the main deck. So Andres starts off his video by stating that this video won't go as deep as he intended to go with it, as it's not for the people who are paying for his coaching currently. But he still wanted to go in depth as much as he can without making it unfair for his students, and that's out of respect. He tried to max out on the Despia engine as much as he could based on his ideas and his testing. So to start off, he talks about 3 Aliber, 3 Tragedy, and the 3 additional names. He says, in terms of decks that I played that are similar, Drytron and Eldlik, it makes it easier to play this deck. The decks that only play 2 Aliber or 2 Tragedy have a huge problem of being able to function. They rely on being able to resolve Baron Fusion and don't utilize the Patchwork engine, which is the polymerization Edgib searches Patchwork. You can keep doing that over and over again, which is what he wanted to avoid, was trying to focus his deck on, resolve Baron Fusion full combo. It seems that what he wanted to max out was the names. A lot of people asked him why he plays additional names. He said that the ad libitum was self-explanatory. He said he played comedy because he expected to play against a lot of skill drain and Eldlik decks. He actually played against 4 or 5 Eldliks in Swiss, so his theory executed very well. His main play with it was to make Guardian Chimera and tributing it so that it would resolve. Another play was tributing Aliber, or when his opponent would impermanence or Veiler him. He says Dramaturge, as explained in his last video, was because there were a lot of times where his branded opening would be dead as he already utilized all his other Despia names. On top of that, it was also a big beat stick for him to be able to push for game or damage. Now, he did state that he did cite it out a lot, but as a 3k beat stick that forces out cards and negates to help him play through his board, it was his favorite card that you don't have to also use immediately. You can special summon a fusion and utilize it to negate on that summon. Also, your opponent cannot respond if you have branded loss. So if you have like branded loss, you special summon a fusion and it's on the field. You can target, it's kind of like the new card that just came out, Boral End Dragon, right? Where they target a effect monster on the field and negates effects. So if it's a monster that's like a hard once per turn, right? You can use it on the summon to negate it before they are even able to activate it, And if they activate a card, like for example, like let's say they have like branded fusion and you have branded lost, right? If you have branded lost and you train branded red and you special summon your monster, not only do they not get to use the quick effect to send a fusion monster because of branded lost, but you're also able to negate that effect and they don't get any of their graveyard triggers. So if they sent tragedy and they wanted to use the effect, or they sent Engine chain off of like polymerization or like whatever they use, they're not able to get those on summon effects because of the effect of branded lost. He said, one foolish, it helps you get to tragedy, which gets you to Aliber. It has applications as well with Snow and Ecclesia in the main deck, plus Token Collector in the side deck. The card also lets you send Fallen Albaz, so you can utilize Branded in red. One Gold Sark. This one is similar to Foolish. It allows you to get to Tragedy or the Tri Brigade. It's a great starter. One Theater, and he went really in depth with it. In depth. Sorry. It's a searchable polymerization. I don't see my deck like others, he says. I see it differently. Most players will see it as start off branded fusion and utilize my other cards as the backup, and that's incorrect. For me, this is a deck of fusion monsters that merge with the old school way. Slap down polymerization and not just slap down branded fusion. In the riffles of people playtesting hands, they just go, this deck doesn't function. They just ash my branded fusion and I lose. Okay. So then if your deck just loses to your branded fusion getting ash, why are you searching branded fusion? Why don't you play a different way? You're not looking for it. For example, if I have an Aliber and a Patchwork, why don't I just use Aliber to search branded lost, continue with Patchwork, decide where to go from there. I just don't use Aliber to just search branded lost though. Or he says, why don't I use Aliber to search branded lost, continue with Patchwork, continue to go from there? It looks like a bad fusion spell, but when you're able to get to Mary Jade without having to go through branded fusion, which is what I wanted to show people that it can't be done with any problem. You don't have to always go through branded fusion to get to Mary Jade, which is another reason why I decided to play 3 Albaz. He continues by stating that theater plays an important role in long games. It allows you access to another fusion every turn by utilizing Comedy and Ecclesia. The fusions get destroyed. Albaz comes into play off of the fusion. If Albaz gets destroyed, you can special summon a level 8 or higher fusion from your graveyard. Most of the time, they're going to leave the fusion on the field. So next turn, you can utilize Comedy by tributing the fusion, then Comedy crashing, and be able to revive that fusion again. Let's put it in the best case scenario where we block 3 attacks. We use the effect of Mirror Jade, remove something from the field. On our turn, we crash a Comedy into the monster, reborn the Mirror Jade, and Mirror Jade lets us use the effect once again. As you can see, Theater is very useful in long games, and I cannot understand why people don't play or utilize this card to its full potential. So this is huge, right? He's explaining to us that the reason why people aren't utilizing the theater is the fact that people don't realize the graveyard effect is insane, right? Like you're able to just block a bunch of attacks. Like you have like the what's it called? There's one special summons when it leaves the field, right? I think it's Corridus. So let's say you have this card, right? You use this, you special back over it. Then you trigger the field spell. The field spell lets you special summon a level 8 or higher fusion monster from your graveyard. So you're able to block a third attack, and you can use the effect of that fusion that you use, right? So you're able to block so many attacks, and there's so many different, applications to this card that a lot of people are not understanding. He goes next into 3 branded opening. This is self-explanatory. There's no need to go into detail. 3 branded in red. He says we play 3 branded in red because it's proportional to Albion the Shrouded Dragon. Branded in red is a card that makes it easier for us to play when we open it with Albion. Albion can send Albaz, set up Branded in red. We set this up with Aliber and any dark in our hand to go into Lubellion, and from there we can get to Mirror Jade without having to resolve Branded Fusion. This is exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to play a deck that does not lose to having to resolve Branded Fusion or our Branded Fusion getting ashed. As I explained before, there will be hands where my only play is to go for Branded Fusion. Well, so be it. And if I was playing any other version, it would probably be the exact same play anyways. But if I had the possibility of going another route, I would. He goes next into I'll be on the Shrouded Dragon. It says this card was utilized to send Falna Albaz or Branded Opening to play around DPE or to extend our hand with Branded in red. Another important application is to send Branded Opening if I make Chimera in the middle of a chain where my opponent is also making a Chimera. So my opponent would destroy my Chimera in the middle of the chain link. But theoretically, my Chimera would not resolve because it leaves the field before it's able to even activate its effect. But what I could do is I could send the Branded Opening to the graveyard before I make it, and then when they would attempt to destroy the Chimera, I could prevent the destruction so it stays on the field, and I could resolve my Chimera on the following chain. He goes next to 3 Branded Fusion. This card obviously makes the deck easier to play, but my way of playing the deck, thanks to being able to play this deck before the structure deck came out, is that you didn't need the card back then. It's obviously excellent. It's probably one of the best fusion cards that's ever been printed in the history of the game, along with, Shaddoll Fusion and Destiny Fusion. But why should a duelist depend on it? Making a player relying on resolving this card does not make sense. Then he goes into Branded Loss. This card is a very good card. As I keep stating, there's many ways to get to Mirror Jades without having to resolve Branded Fusion, which in theory gives me a huge advantage. My opponent will always wait to ash my Branded Fusion and not my starters. What if my opponent just does not get to ash my Branded Fusion if I just don't go for it and there isn't an opening for it? My opponent is going to hold their ash in their hand until the following turn and they're not going to be able to use it. On the next turn, right, the next time he goes for this play, his opponent's going to realize that I don't go for Branded Fusion. Now I can actually punish them by going for the play that lets me search Branded Fusion because my opponent is going to ash early on. These decisions are what makes the difference of winning and losing a game. So this is really huge, right? If your first turn, you go for the play that he's talking about, right? Why are we searching Branded Fusion if we're just going to lose to Ash? Well, let's go for the other play, right? We go for the other play. We go for Patchwork. They don't Ash either one, right? Or you activate Patchwork, then you go into Aliber, whatever it may be, whatever your order is, right? And your opponent is just waiting to Ash the Branded Fusion because they're that's the card that's going to get you there, right? And they don't realize it. And then you start comboing, they see this, and they're well, I should have Ashed early. Now the next turn, right, your opponent's going to be oh, you're going to be summon Aliber effect. They're going to go Ash, and then you slap down Branded Fusion. Or you go activate Patchwork. They go Ash. You're cool, Aliber search Branded Fusion, and now I have full combo, right? It's all kind of a mind game in a sense. Goes with 3 Falna Albaz. He says, I love this card because I have so many ways to fusion summon that I want to see this card at all times. It makes my hands more consistent. It lets me utilize Patchwork. It lets me utilize Theater, Branded in red, Polymerization. I need to see this card in some way to utilize my deck's full potential of playing around Ash or them negating my Branded Fusion. This card is never dead. It's good to utilize with all of my 3-ofs, and it's good late game as well to keep consolidating my opponent's board. So he talks about how even when you're going into the grind game and you start seeing the Albaz, right, you're still going to keep consolidating the board and getting rid of their board. So you're going to keep going over and over their deck. And his deck's full potential, because he plays 3, is that the third one will come up for him because he's playing a grind game. He's always trying to keep hand advantage, which is a huge thing in his version, right? And that's why he's playing 3 Albaz. He just wants to see it because he needs to be able to utilize it with all the fusion monsters in the extra deck. Then he goes into the Frankfurt engine, which is 3 patchwork, 3 edge up chain, and 2 polymerization. This engine, he says, is 100% necessary in this deck. It's just a complete extender and gives you advantage when discarding for cards like Super Poly, Droplet, and Branded Opening. It's very important in this deck to keep hand advantage. This package also lets you get to 4 cards for Fairy Tale Snow, which is super important. And those 4 cards, being like, if you go like Patchwork into Edge of Chain and Poly, and then you use the Edge of Chain, you can search for another Patchwork. So you're able to, keep using those cards for Fairy Tale Snow, setting up the graveyard. 3 Super Poly. In a format where mostly every deck is playing a fusion, whether that be the Mirror or DPE, there's no reason to not play 3. The only time I wouldn't play this is if Despia / Branded falls out of the meta. But we have so many versions of Branded at the moment. We have Invoked, Eldlik, Drytron, and he even has utility against Prank Kids because they play DPE. Now, he went really in depth with this, saying that Prank Kids playing DPE against his deck is the worst mistake a Prank Kid player can make against him, especially this version. He said the only player that I played against that played 100% excellent was Chris LeBlanc. He didn't focus on making DPE. He actually focused on going for the Prank Kid engine. The DPE engine actually would just lose him the game and not let him survive. But the Prank Kid engine actually gives him the ability to double Regeki and have the chance of survival, to have the chance to come back on the follow-up. So a huge thing with that, right? He's talking about how like the Prank Kids decks should be going more towards the Prank Kid engine and not the just like, DPE pass that deck, So really huge statement by him. Goes next into 1 Call by the Grave. This card is amazing in a deck that if I just play 1 card and it resolves, for example, like he talks about this whole entire thing is Brand Fusion versus Ash. It's also just really good in the mirror match. And I thought that was really interesting because most of the time when you hear Call by the Grave in the mirror match, it's like, well, I can't utilize it on my following turn. But if you're just kind of shutting out your opponent completely, or you're shutting off certain aspects of the game, it's probably really good. Then he goes with 1 Snow and 1 Ecclesia. He says, these are my light targets to make Albion. That's all he really said on it. He went more in detail about that in the last video as well. And then he goes really into detail with these last 4 cards. First, he starts off with 2 Forbidden Droplet. This card, along with Super Poly, are my Goring second cards. I think it is more than enough in this deck, especially with the fact that we are not in a format with boards that are unbreakable. Sometimes, something that I always complained about is that we were at a time where it was impossible to play because there was mounted boards that were impossible to break. Nowadays, we are finally playing again. You can make trades, you can try to break boards, you can really try to play. Now, there are moments in which you cannot play. They Scythe Lock you, they Appaloosa Savage, and like 1,000 other things. When you look at it, having hand traps didn't really help you stop those combos. Realistically, the only cards that would stop combos like that are Super Poly and Droplet. It's actually quite simple when people tell me, how are you not playing hand traps? You're not going to stop them. You're not going to interact with them. But when you look at a deck like Prank Kids, they're always going to play around those hand traps anyways. Their decks are built like that. If you look at it, you have to open up 2 hand traps anyways. And if I'm playing 45 cards, the chance of me opening 2 hand traps would actually be me having to play 9 to 12 hand traps. And in most of those hand traps, I'm actually ruining the consistency in my deck. If I play 6 hand traps, what is the possibility I open 2? Almost never. If I wanted to commit hand traps in my deck, I would have to fit Ash and Permanent, Veiler, I don't know, DD Crows. There are a lot of hand traps that can be used. And at that point, those hand traps do not secure me that my opponent isn't going to play. If I open 1, it only guarantees that my opponent isn't going to Griffin me. If I open 2, I already only have 4 cards that I'm going to play. I'm going to have to make sure that my opponent isn't going to interrupt my plays with those 4 cards that I have left. Because now if my opponent has an interruption, I have 3 other cards, right? So let's assume that the other 3 cards are not so optimal. And at that point, I simply cannot play. I would have had to open up 2 hand traps plus 4 very good optimal cards. So if I put myself in a position to open 2 hand traps plus 4 good optimal cards, I would rather open up with 6 very good cards to play around 1 or 2 interruptions that have to have 3 excellent cards, in which it totally reduces the chances of it happening. I cannot depend on the entire tournament. I'm going to open Branded Fusion, Cross Out, Ash, and Permanents, and something else with a Super Poly, which it, in a perfect world would happen, which I personally never think about. That is why I decided not to play hand traps. And that's the statement right there, right? When he went into depth about Droplet, he really went into detail about why he did not play hand traps and just played these going second cards. His deck already plays through a lot of hand traps. He's already he feels like he's in a format where you can break boards. Not many people are scythe locking you, and when people are gonna scythe lock you, you have to open up like the perfect 2 hand traps, or you have to open up like cards like that, right? So even in a time where you're not going to be able to play right, those decks also have inconsistencies, which they could just outright lose the game. Or like, if you're playing against like the PK deck and they have set up like the lock, if he has super poly, right, most of the time you're able to just completely out it, unless they're not playing the branded, or see the adventure token package, right? Um, which at that point would probably be a good meta call, honestly. Think about that now, but yeah. And then the last 2 cards were Springing Kit and Tri Brigade Mercohir. These are the 2 targets that you can add off of Branded and Lost, besides Ecclesia. Mercohir is ideal to search on my opponent's turn to negate a card. Kit is not very common, but the main reason is after searching Branded Lost, the whole world has the exact same play. Use the Mirror Jade to remove the Aliber so that I cannot brand it in red. But what if I can go into Kit, look for the red, and I don't need to remove the Aliber or use the effect of Mirror Jade? It's at that point I have a Mirror Jade that is going to destroy. I have a branded in red. I keep the Aliber in the graveyard, which in many cases is important. And I'm not forced to directly use my Albion to use unnecessary resources to look for a Branded in red. I prefer to have the Kit look for it, make the Branded in red merge, and on my opponent's turn, it will give me access to the Mercohir, which is the reason I put in Kit. Aside from this, it also has good synergy with Polymerization and Edge Imp to allow me to see Patchwork. Many times the Patchwork is dead and I can't resolve it, so I utilize Kit to put back the Poly and resolve it for free. So this is really cool, right? Because there's times where he sees the second Poly, or or he has like, he already used 1 Poly and he searches the other Poly and he has a Patchwork that he wants to resolve. He can, he can target one of the branded Speller Traps that's banished with the deck in graveyard, and then he puts 1 card from his hand to the bottom of the deck. So he can put the Poly on bottom, resolve the Patchwork now because there's a Poly in his deck. So that's really cool. And that's his main deck. The side deck, 3 Token Collector. Says this card is amazing against Praying Kids. Any deck that abuses tokens like Cerberus Eldritch. He says he does not use this in the Adventure Despia. He called it the mirror match because Griffin is really easy to bait. However, he does use it against the Adventure engine if their engines rely on using the token, like for example, the Seeker Adventure deck, or if a deck needs to link climb. So if he sees it as he needs to pop the token to prevent them from even able to like link climb, he still utilizes it to use that, because it's just going to keep coming back every turn if they're playing the Adventure engine as well, right? But in the mirror match, popping the token really isn't that important, because by the time they use their first Draco back and everything, it's already in the graveyard, so they're not going to be able to keep utilizing all that. He goes into Twin Twister. So this card is used against back row decks and against Flunder. And then he goes into There Can Be Only One. It's the same thing with Twin Twister. Use this against Flunder. It has applications against Swartzel, and it does come up against Rogue deck if it's there. So for example, like there's, now we're going to start seeing more Dragon Link because of the new set. We're going to start seeing Salamangreat. So this card's really good to utilize against them. Goes next into Nibiru. I personally don't think this card has a high impact on the format, but I didn't want to cut it because it helps the Prank Kids and the Swartzel matchup. Now, this is because players coming into this event were no longer uh they weren't expecting there to be a Nibiru in the main deck or side deck at all. If we look at this YCS, there are actually very few Nibirus in any player's main deck or side deck. And for that same reason, we actually set a Nibiru. Because they in the Swartzel deck, they would try to make the new synchro, right? To steal 2 cards just with Moyi. So they would go like Moyi, go into the level 8, search for Long Yon, go into the new 10 synchro, and that one banishes a monster, banishes a spell, plus they have a monster negate. So they would get greedy because they're not expecting Nibiru anymore and wouldn't go into Baron. So they would just not play out of Nibiru. They would play into Nibiru actually. Then he goes next into 2-dimensional barrier. As I explained in my video before, this card is only very good in a deck that can kill you on the following turn. The decks that play this card have the same synergy with Joel and Lockbird. So for example, when you're playing D-Barrier, you really just want to kill your opponent, right? That's the whole reason of playing D-Barrier. You shut them out for a turn, and next turn you have lethal, you have Dramaturge, a 3K beat stick, and you have all these other plays, right? To keep going. Then he goes the 2DD Crow. This card is just obviously amazing in the mirror match. I will say Andres did say for his extra deck, no one really asked for an explanation after the last video, except on the last 2 cards in his extra deck. And his last 2 cards, and I have confirmed this, is Spring the Iron Dash Dragon and Titanic Lad the Ash Dragon. He did not play the Tri Brigade, and I've said this multiple times in the video. The way that he searches for Merkel here is off of Branded Lost. Now, I will say, his last 7 to 8 minutes of the video is just him really just explaining the combos, and it gets a little detailed. So I left that out from this because it was pretty much the last 7 minutes was just him playing on Dueling Book and explaining it. But if you all want to see that, comment down below. Let me know. We can probably make a video on that to kind of explain it. All his other ideas were explained in the last video. If you guys have not seen that yet, make sure to check it out here at the end of this video. Other than that, again, if you guys haven't already, please like, comment, and subscribe to me. It means a lot to me. Other than that, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Thank you guys.